Okay, so I think we are live. I think just wait for probably 30 seconds or so as people sort of trickle in. But if someone from the audience can just tell me if they can hear me fine, that would be great. I think Ariba will just, yeah, hi. Okay, great. So we got a few nods from people that they can hear me fine. Perfect. So I think we can start. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's staying safe, staying at home during these tough times. And welcome to this third episode of our MBA application journey series, where we have conversations with MBA candidates from top business schools to really learn about their application journeys in order to help you with yours. And I think it's a great way to sort of do that. I'm Ayush Gandhi, and I'm a first year candidate at Columbia Business School in New York. And like in the previous sessions, I'm your host again for today. And today we have with us Ariba Iqbal. Ariba is a recent graduate from INSEAD in the France campus and will be joining McKinsey for full time soon enough. So welcome, Ariba, and thank you for joining in.
Hey guys, thanks for having me over. Really looking forward to this interaction.
Great. So I think before I sort of hit you up with questions, Ariba, I think we'll take 30 seconds to explain the layout to our audience. So we want to start off by understanding from Ariba why she picked a one-year MBA and in Europe over the US. So I think just a few questions around that. Then we'll move on to certain INSEAD application questions, like the failure examples, some strengths and weaknesses, etc. We will then move on to talk about how she prepared for her interview and like what are the things that worked for her in that preparation. And we'll close off the topic with a very important question, which is around the impact the current COVID-19 pandemic can have on applications for people who are applying for the 2021 intake. So we'll just hear Ariba's take on how you can navigate through that issue a little better. So great. I think a lot of people have joined in. So Ariba, I just want to kick it off with our first question for you. And sorry, I didn't mention one other thing. After these questions, I would open it up for questions. So in case you have any questions for Ariba, feel free to shoot after we're done with our set of questions. So great. Ariba, I want to start it off with a very important question, which a lot of people sort of juggle with is how do you decide between a one-year MBA versus a two-year MBA? And what was the thought process that was in your mind and you ended up deciding for a one-year MBA?
Sure. So that's a really good question. And very honestly, when I started my MBA application, I didn't very consciously think about this as the deciding criteria. My criteria to pick schools was more dependent on the brand and what was a better personal fit. But this is obviously a very important question on why one-year MBA and why a two-year MBA. The way I went about thinking about this question in particular was first point is how committed you are to doing an MBA. So for me personally, I wasn't very sure if MBA is my end goal, which meant investing 2 years in a long MBA and then realizing this is not what I wanted probably is not the best decision as compared to doing it for 1 year. And then if I feel I still want to do a master's in something, I can still consider that. So I think that was one big driving factor personally. The other factors, which are relatively smaller when you're investing in something like an MBA, but still had value for me, were how much money and time you're willing to invest. So obviously, a one-year MBA is not half the cost of your two-year MBA, but it is still significantly cheaper. And personally, for me, I didn't have a lot of financial support. I had to pay for the entire tuition fee, my staying expenses, everything on my own. And having worked in India in the past, I didn't have enough savings to sponsor that, which meant I had to take a loan, which meant I would have to spend that much more time paying back my loan and have more financial constraints. So these were the two big driving factors for me. I think the one other thing that is very important and people should keep in mind is how drastic a change are you expecting after your MBA? So let's say if you want to change both your geography and your sector, and you want to experience a lot of different job profiles before you make that decision, then 1 year MBA is obviously too short to give you that experience and exposure. Because if you're lucky, you get to intern for like 2 months, but that's your only chance, and then you have to sit for final recruitments, as opposed to a 2 year MBA where you can probably do 2 internships, take up a part-time job, so try different sectors, get yourself more time to explore and experience. So I think those are the three big factors I would say that drove my decision, which was what kind of a change am I looking for? How much time do I want to invest? And how much money am I willing to spend on this?
Perfect. I think return on investment is like one of the most important things why people end up picking a 1 year MBA. So I think that's like very well put together, Ariba. Thank you. Just jumping on to the next question, and again, like you might be able to draw some parallels, but again, like how Europe versus US, and like even INSEAD, it has a Singapore branch. With respect to the geography, what was going in your mind, like why you were deciding that?
Yeah, I think with respect to geography, and this is something that everyone would tell you, if you are very sure on a particular geography, so say for instance, you are very keen on working in the US, then this is no doubt you should apply to a school in US. Obviously, the recruiting opportunities are going to be better. You'll have better exposure to the local culture, society, and things like that. So if you are very specifically focused on one geography, definitely pick a school in that geography. However, if you're more flexible, like the perspective that I was coming from, I was very open. I didn't have a specific geography. I was happy to explore US, Europe, Southeast Asia. I was willing to work anywhere outside of India, something that excited me. So I wasn't super committed to a particular geography. So for me, INSEAD made more sense because firstly, it gives me the flexibility. We have a campus in Fontainebleau, France. We have a campus in Singapore. We have a campus in Abu Dhabi. And now we're recently opening a campus in San Francisco. And through the year, you can choose to study in different campuses and continue with it. So it provided you a lot more flexibility. And in addition to that, even our recruiters, because we have a very diverse class set, we have people from almost like 90 countries. So you have recruiters from Canada, America, Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia. So it's a lot more diverse and you can explore a lot more. So it really depends on how clear you are in your head. If you are super committed to US, go for US. If you're not, then maybe explore something that's a little more flexible.
Great. I think very well put together. I think if just to echo what you're saying, I mean, like if you're very sure about, let's say, US as a geography, it would be much easier for you to get recruitment opportunities if you're doing your MBA in the US. While I would say, like at the same time, if you want to like move back to India, doing an MBA from a like slightly more evolved economy and like a school that is better renowned, you can always make that switch back. But I think in that sense, like some of the best schools in the world, like it would be a great opportunity to just go there and like see where you want to work after that. So I think thanks for that, Ariba. And I think you did end up answering a little bit about my third question also, which was what was specific about INSEAD that really attracted you? Because there are like other schools in Europe as well. Like I know there's LBS, there's Oxford. So like what was about INSEAD that really attracted you to it?
Sure. So what attracted me to INSEAD? So, I mean, I'll just go back to how I picked school. And I didn't actually apply to a whole lot of schools. I think I applied to 3 max. And third was after I had got an INSEAD admit. So I didn't even bother finishing that application and all that. But I think the 2 driving factors for me were first, brand. I know it sounds very superficial and vain, but in all honesty, the brand does add a lot of credibility and does make a huge difference, because most people who do an MBA want a job after it. So the school that you go to will definitely affect those opportunities. Having said that, it's not that brand is the do and die. It's just one of the important criteria that you should consider. The second criteria, which I think was actually equally important, if not more important for me, was just my personal fit. And just to give you an example, this is not what I'm saying is true. Just to give you a sense on what I'm talking about is, let's say, for example, Harvard is known to have a very super competitive environment. And personally, I know that's something that's the kind of environment that I don't flourish in. Whereas INSEAD is supposed to be a lot more collaborative, and I feel personally I would flourish more in that environment. So I'm just giving you an example, but that's the second more important criteria I used on what was a better personal fit for me. In terms of picking schools, I think those were the two big criteria I used. And then, of course, other things followed. How much money do I want to spend? Do I want to do 1 year, geography, and things like that? But the driving force was these two factors. The other thing that was in favor of INSEAD, which again I've already mentioned a little bit, is just the diversity. I've spoken to a lot of people from a lot of different schools in a lot of different parts of the world, and I don't think any other school matches the kind of diversity you get to experience and live in INSEAD. Of course, there are pros and cons to it, but I think personally it was a very enlightening and fun experience to have. So that's my part on what attracted me to INSEAD or how I picked my schools. How did I gather information about the school? So I think this is again a very important point. I think the best way to gather information is just talk to people. Just talk to as many people as you can. Prioritize your schools, get your top 4, 5, however many you plan to apply to, and then speak to as many people as you can. I would say at least 3 people per school, if not more. Talk to as many as you can, but at least 3. Because I think that's the best way to understand and whether that school is a good fit for you or not. And this I've spoken to about with a lot of people. The application process is not just for the schools to assess whether you're a good fit. It's also an opportunity for you to assess whether that school is a good place for you. So make the most of that. Definitely talk to a lot of people. And then I think outside of that, you can always read up articles. There is a lot of news information available online. So I maxed out on that as well. Of course, setting up calls takes a little more time. So in that, I would do my own research, just sit online, look for articles. And I think between those two sources, you can form a decently good opinion on which school works for you and which school maybe doesn't. So I think those are the two big sources that I probably used.
Sure. And I think I cannot iterate this enough that just talking to people from different business schools is just one of the best ways to learn about the culture. Because on the facade, like it might seem that, yeah, you know, all business schools are the same, like everyone like who goes in there, like a very similar people, but really like every school has a niche, and exploring whether you sort of fit to that niche is like a very, very important criteria. So thanks for that, Ariba. With that, I think just moving to the second portion where I want to talk to you a little bit specifically about the applicants. So I know that you didn't go for an MBA consultant, and you know a lot of people end up thinking that you know anyways like spending so much money on like just going through the whole MBA process. Why not spend a little extra and like you know increase your chances? So would love to understand like the fact that you did not hire one, like what was the thought process behind it, and like do you think it was the right decision?
Sure. So as you said, no, I didn't hire an MBA consultant, and I think it's a very personal choice. I honestly don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to this. It'll vary highly from people to people. My thought process behind this was when I did my first application, I actually just did it very half-heartedly. Like I literally checked the dates a few days before I was supposed to submit. Not saying that's what you should do, but I'm just trying to tell you where I'm coming from. And even though I literally had like 3 days or something to put my application together, the one thing I realized was I wasn't really struggling with putting my story together. Like I knew what I learned from each experience that I've had, from the 2 different jobs that I've had, what I want to take forward. I had a decent sense on how my story was flowing. And then when I checked with a few friends and my mother, and they had certain comments or maybe change something here and there. But in general, the backbone of the story made a lot of sense and it flowed very easily for me. So I didn't feel the need of getting a consultant, and that's why I decided not to go ahead with it. Having said that, I think I was lucky that I had my story fairly sorted, and I had a support system in form of my friends and family who could give me the right guidance. But if you feel either of the two are lacking, if you think you have questions and concerns about your story which you're not confident about, or if maybe you can't rely on your friends or you're not comfortable enough discussing this with them, I think going for a consultant is a very good idea. You should not think twice about it. If you have any doubt, just go for it. As you already said, since you're already investing so much, like a little more money doesn't make a difference. Having said that, I think the more important part is when you do decide to go for a consultant, how you pick your consultant. Because I've heard very mixed reviews. Like, I know some people who went to the best rated consultant and had a very bad experience. I know people who went to someone who probably just do like 1 or 2 students in the entire year, but because of the customization, their experience was good. So I would say invest time in picking the right consultant. Don't just blindly follow what people are telling. Talk to them, see if they're a good fit with you, see if you can honestly have conversations and brainstorm ideas with them. And I think that's the more important decision to take on who your consultant is. But yeah, I think personally for me, it worked well. I didn't feel the need, so I decided against it.
Sure, and I think just to like
For me, sorry.
sorry, I missed what you said in the last.
No, I was saying, I think for me personally, it was the right decision. I don't
Okay,
regret it.
okay, great. But I think, yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways from what Ariba is saying here is that it's a personal choice at the end of the day, and I think again, like, just reflecting on like how, like where you are with respect to the application process and the amount of help that you need, and if you see that you can't sort of get that from like your, like, you know, friends or mentors that you have, then I think it's a great way to go about it. So yes, and I think I can't like repeat that enough. So great. Just jumping a little bit, Reba, to like some of the application questions, and I know like INSEAD application is like one of the most rigorous applications that could be there. So just some specific questions about the application. This is like a more general one, but how did you think about like the short term and the long term goals that you want to talk about in your application?
Right. Again, I think it's personal, but I'll just tell you what my thought process was. So the way I thought about it was, I started with my long-term goal that, okay, let's say 10, 15 years down the line, based on the experience I've had so far, what do I vision myself doing? And once I had the answer, so I was like, okay, in 10, 15 years, let's say I want to be, I don't know, I want to be a scuba diver, scuba trainer or something like that. Then I think the next step was, okay, that's my end goal in 15 years. Now I know that I'm doing an MBA. After my MBA, I might have constraints like I want to pay my loans, so I want a decent paying job. But at the same time, I want to do something that's remotely related or will give me relevant experience for what I want to achieve eventually. So based on those constraints, what would be the most logical short-term goal? So I personally started with my long-term goal, and then based on my current constraints, try to come up with a short-term goal that would help me link my current context with my future plan. So yeah, that was the thought process that I went ahead with.
Sure, and like just to like also throw in some ideas that we've heard from other people. Again, it's a slightly personal thing, because I think last time we had Vishesh talking about how he followed the inverted approach, where he said that, okay, what do I want to do after an MBA? And then if I'm done with that experience, what do I ultimately want to do? So again, like it really depends on how you want to take those questions. But I think one of the most important things that Ariba also sort of alluded to was how it all sort of connects. Like ultimately your short-term goal connecting with your long-term goal, your MBA sort of connecting with your short-term goal. And like, as long as that connection is there, what approach you follow is, it doesn't really matter. So great. Another specific, so this was a more generic question, but I think one very specific INSEAD question is about, like talking about your failure example, like in your professional life. And I know INSEAD has that. How did you approach that question? Because this is again one of those questions that's like, it's just very hard to tackle, right? I mean, like, do you really want to talk about your actual failures? How did you sort of navigate through this situation?
Yeah. No, that's true. So INSEAD application is a little different, and it's different on 3 main things. And I'll just quickly go through them. I think one was that we had a lot more essays to write. So it wasn't like one long essay. Of course, there were some long, but there were also a lot of short questions, which basically, if you have your story right, it's pretty similar. It's just a slight deep dive into one particular aspect. Example, failure question. So what's a biggest failure that you faced in your life? The way I tackled it was, again, I think these questions were, what is your biggest failure, or what is the biggest challenge, or, what's the one instance where you showed leadership? I mean, again, my very personal experience is that these are instances which would come to you very easily because it's so specific. So the moment I read, oh, what's the biggest failure, I was like, okay, I know this is the particular incident that I have in mind. And then I have to think through, okay, why did this happen? How did I react? What was my learning curve? And then sort of build your story there. But I think for a lot of these essay questions, which are specific, just go through your story and it's all there. As long as you have that basic story and backbone in place, this is just like a little bit of a deep dive. Just make sure it's connected and make sure you're authentic. That's all that matters. And it'll just automatically flow. I think the few parts of the application which are slightly different are one, we have a few video questions. So basically you're given a prompt and then you're given 15 seconds to prepare, and then you have to record an answer live and give an answer in like 30 seconds, which was something different about the INSEAD application. Again, I know it sounds very intimidating, but one, they allow you to practice. So you can do 2-3 rounds and they give you mock questions. So you get a hang of how it will work. And in terms of content, they are not really judging you on how accurate or factual you are. They're just trying to see how you react when you're pushed out of your comfort zone, or how authentic do you look in your interaction. So just try to be yourself. They already have your essays and they'll just try to see if there's something that really jumps out, where, you know, in the essays you come forward as a very social person, but suddenly in the video you're like very cold, or they just look for those things. They don't really look for proper answers. So just be yourself, and that's all that matters. The one other thing that INSEAD application has, which is slightly different, is they really emphasize a lot on international experience. And that can at times be tricky, especially like even for me, I was born and brought up in Delhi. I worked in Mumbai. So in terms of professional experience, I had no international experience. And that's okay. It's not that you won't get in. I got in. It's just that you have to be creative about how you put it forward. So when they ask you for international experience, the reason they do that is because you're going to be interacting with people from 90 different countries, from different backgrounds, different experiences. So they want to make sure you can deal with that sort of a context. So try, if you don't have international experience, just try to give examples where you worked in a very diverse team, or maybe some of your colleagues were from outside, or maybe you were part of an international organization, but you were representing a local branch. So try to be a little creative in those instances. Even if you don't have international experience, it's fine. It's just how you show that you are a team player, you are adaptive, and you can work well with different people. That's all that they're checking for. But yeah, those are the big things that I can remember off the top of my head, which was sort of different for the INSEAD application.
I have another one, and I think it doesn't typically come up in a lot of essays, but like people end up preparing for it. But this was like a strengths and weakness question. I know it's there in the current INSEAD application, but I don't know if you had it, and if you did, like how did you attack this question?
Again, I mean, I don't think there's like a specific way in which I went about thinking about my strengths and weaknesses. So when I was doing my one big story on, you know, what my experience has been in the past and how I plan to take forward, my story was actually very dependent on, you know, these are the areas where I do well, these are the areas where I want to improve, and this is what I want eventually. So again, the strengths and weaknesses were sort of very inbuilt in that answer. But what I would suggest is, if you're not sure and if you're struggling with this, the one thing that really worked well for me is just to talk to friends or my family who knew me very well, right? So I would just go to my mother and be like, oh, you know, I'm struggling. Do you think this is a strength, or do you think this is a weakness? Talk to people you've worked with. You keep getting your reviews. You can go back, refer to those. I think that's a lot of data to go with. I'm sure if you've been working for some time, a lot of this would have already come up. So you would see the patterns. So just talk to people who know you, your colleagues, your friends, your family. I think they are the best people to help you when tackling these questions.
Right. And I think two things that you sort of pointed out, Ariba, which I thought was very helpful in my case also, was just, I don't know if all employers have that, but at FSG, we had this like a yearly feedback evaluation sort of a forum where like you used to get feedback from our managers. So I actually relied on that document so heavily for this kind of question, like really, you know, like because you start seeing a pattern, like, you know, this is the kind of weakness that you've been getting a lot. And then you start focusing on that a little more. And I think even like one other important thing, which schools are sort of looking for, like even when you talk about weaknesses, whether it's in your interviews or whether it's on your application, they want to see how you're emerging out of that weakness. It's okay to talk about weaknesses. Everybody has weakness, but like, is it something that you're working on? Like, is it something that you're getting better at? So I think that's a very important area that people should focus on. And I think very rightly said on that, Ariba. Just coming to the last part of the question that I have, so which is around, like the first one is around the interview experience overall. So like, I want to understand, like, A, how did you prepare for these interviews? And B, how was your interview experience overall with INSEAD?
Sure. So how I prepared for the interview, I think basically I started by just jotting down the common questions. If you go, you do your research online, you'll get a bunch of questions which people typically ask. And that's a good starting point to have. Obviously, the questions might be here and there, but at least you'll have a sense. You'll know on what lines you need to think and how to prepare. So I literally jotted down the questions and then I jotted down my answers to see what I was thinking, how was I putting down. And I think the one thing that works best is just do mock interviews. Again, do them with your friends, do them with people who know you well, both personally and professionally. I think the one thing that a lot of people tend to do is just talk to other people who have done MBA. So, because you're applying for an MBA, you'll be like, oh, this person is probably best suited. Of course, that's true. They've gone through the same path. That's very important. But I think also try and get input from one person who's non-MBA, because that'll give you like a slightly different perspective. And it worked very well for me, actually. So I did one mock interview with one of my friends who's doing her PhD in Oxford. And she had a very non-business perspective on some answers. And that helps you, like, it also made me more honest in my answers. That I was like, oh, I don't want to have to talk about work all the time. I can talk about other things. And it helps you stand out. And it also shows your authenticity. So I would say, definitely do mock interviews and try and do it with different kinds of people. So someone who has worked with you, so will give you a professional perspective, and someone who's probably known you for really long, so will give you like your personal perspective. So do those, and I think that works best. My interview experience was actually really well, and in all honesty, a lot better than how my mocks went. Just because I think when I was prepping for my mocks, I was very conscious and I was very worried, like, trying to think of the answers and the points. And when I actually went for the interview, it was a lot more organic. It's like a conversation you're having with your manager or someone who's just like maybe slightly senior to you. And both my interviewers were really sweet, very helpful. And literally, I mean, they just wanted to have an honest conversation. They just want to assess whether you are trying to hide something, or are you just like not being yourself? Are you trying to portray an image? So I think the only thing they're checking for is that you be yourself. It's fine if you're like a different person, if you're very different from them, that's okay. You don't always have to connect on something. Maybe you just had a very good argument, that's totally fine. But I think the important point is just to be yourself and be as honest and authentic as you can. But yeah, my interview experiences were actually really good. Both the people like got me for really nice.
And I think like a couple of themes that Ariba has talked about, this is something that like listeners might be resonating with, because this is something that both our previous speakers have also talked about. One, the fact that how you practice for interview is keep doing mocks. Like, don't just like rely on yourself for the preparation. Like, talk to people, like ask them to like mock interview, and because that's really where you get to know like which are the areas that you need to work on. And the other thing which Ariba is talking, again, everybody has said that, is that these interviews are not supposed to trick you. They are like, like just casual conversations where people want to know about your goals. People want to genuinely know about why you want to do an MBA. So I think a couple of things that are coming out here, again, very important for our listeners. Thanks for that, Ariba. Second last, my like overall reflection sort of the question. If you were to do this whole thing once again, like I hope not, but if you were, like, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would do differently?
2, 3 things that I would do differently. I think firstly and foremostly, spend a little more time thinking about why I want to do an MBA. I think for me, it was very organic. In all honesty, I wasn't super keen on doing an MBA. I was very happy with my job and my life in Mumbai, but my parents were very keen that I pursue a master's. So eventually I just gave in to the pressure. But and luckily for me, I enjoyed it. But I can't imagine how exhausting it would be if I had just done it because I'm expected to do it and not have a good time. So it's a lot of investment in the form of money, time, you're moving out. So make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. You don't just have to do an MBA. So think about why you want to do it. I think the other thing is, well, people talk about what MBA courses did you think about, what master courses did you think about. I think one thing that is not super popular, especially in India, is people don't think of non-traditional options. So, you can always take a sabbatical, take some time off, travel, write, just do whatever to give yourself a break and think through things. I think a lot of people don't do that. Like, at least I never considered that as an option. I was just like, no, if I quit my job, then I better be doing something else. I have to do something very concrete. But I think the one key takeaway I have after going to INSEAD is people have had such different experiences, done so many different things in life. So just keep an open mind, just talk to people, see what else is going on. So I think that's one thing that I would definitely advise people to do. Last thing that I would do differently. So I think the one thing that I didn't do was focus on scholarships and financial aid. I was so committed to just like getting the admission. It's not hard. It's if you're committed to it, if you really want to do an MBA, it's worth investing time and thinking about how you'll manage your finances. Yes, worst case loans are always there, but there are a lot of scholarships out there. And just in my conversations, even with my friends, I realized I myself didn't know about half of them. A lot of people didn't know about others. So do your research in that. There's a lot of financial aid available, so make the most of it. So I think if I had to do things differently, those would be the three things that I would do differently.
Perfect. Last question, I think, which is like one of the most important question that is on top of mind for a lot of applicants right now, which is how do you think the current COVID-19 pandemic will affect admissions for 2021 intake? So these are people who would be applying in the next few months for admissions next year, like for enrollment next year. And like, again, like what advice do you have for them? And like, what opinion do you have on like how things might change a little bit with respect to admissions overall?
That's a very loaded question. But I don't think the application process per se might change. But I think a few things to take into consideration when you're deciding whether you should apply now or whether you should postpone is one, I think because of COVID, a lot of classes have become virtual. And personally, and I've spoken to a lot of people, I think the experience that you get sitting in a class, it's nowhere near to having a virtual classroom. Having said that, I think if you're a 2021 intake, by then, in all probability, hopefully, classes should have resumed normally. So I think you are covered in that aspect. I don't think that should act as a hindrance. The other aspect would be recruitment. I mean, right now there is so much uncertainty. Firms don't know whether they want to hire, how the internships are going to work out. There's just a lot of confusion around it. But again, I think if you're a 2021 intake and you start your course next year, maybe your first internship might be a little fuzzy, but after that, by the time it's time for your second internship and your final recruitment, my sense is things should have stabilized. So I think if you're applying for the 2021 intake, you should be fine. You shouldn't be very worried about the COVID situation currently. The process might change here and there, but largely it would remain the same. Worst case, you won't be able to go for an in-person interview. You might have to do it virtually, but that happens irrespective because of geography issues and stuff. So I don't think there's much that you need to be worried about. Just keep going with your prep and keep moving forward.
Perfect. Very well summarized. I think I completely echo with all these points that you've raised, Ariba. Now we just quickly open it up for questions. We do have a lot of interesting questions, but again, like in case you haven't posted your questions, people, you can just start typing in your questions and I'll take as many as I can. So the first one is from Napoleon, and I think, Ariba, this question is around like, what do you think like age has to do with respect to admissions? Because, you know, schools typically have an average age, but I think for someone who's slightly beyond that age limit, like how do you think they should sort of look at this situation? of
Yeah.
applications?
No, that's a valid question. And I know it's true for a lot of schools. But I think one of the best things about INSEAD is it's not just that it's diverse in respect to countries, it's also very diverse with respect to the life stage you're in. So you have a lot of people who are much older, settled with kids, whatnot. The average age in INSEAD was actually, I think, around 29. And we had people like the higher limit, I would say, would be around 34, 35. So INSEAD is pretty flexible in that sense. If you have the right story, if you have a genuine reason on why you want to do an MBA, admission and application should not be an issue. The one thing that I would highlight though is depending on what age you apply in, your recruitment opportunities might get affected. A lot of firms might not be super open to hiring someone who's 35, 37 or much older. And this is what I've heard, that it's true for a lot of consulting firms. I don't personally know. Having said that, a lot of my friends who are in their early 30s did get hired by consulting firms. But yeah, I would say in terms of admission and application, you're good to go. But just think about your story and what are you looking to recruit for a little bit, and maybe do a little more research on that aspect.
Sure. And I think just one other thing that I would want to add is that irrespective of what age at which you're applying, I think even if you're on the slightly higher bracket, as long as you can justify that an MBA is the right move for you at that career point, I think it's fine. Like even with respect to recruitment, I know like Ariba has pointed out correctly that, there might be some industries who might not be open to people who are slightly older. But again, like if you're very sure about the industry that you want to get into, and you sort of have the right relevant background and like a story behind why you want to do that, again, like I don't think it's a very big concern. So that's just a small thing that I would want to add. Ariba, there are a lot of questions around just your pre-MBA profile, education background. So I think if you could just quickly share that just for context, like people have some understanding on, what are the brands that you carry with respect to experience?
Sure. So I did my undergrad from St. Stephen's in Delhi University in mathematics. Then through on-campus recruitment, I started working with Monitor, a Monitor Strategy Group. I was in their Bombay office for about 2.5 years. Then from that was strategy consulting. From that, I went to social development consulting at FSG. Again, their Mumbai office for around 2.5 years or so. And that's when I finally applied to INSEAD.
Sure, perfect. I think there are a lot of questions about your GMAT scores. I think I just want to shout out to people there that this is not specifically a GMAT coaching sort of like GMAT tip sort of a session, but Ariba, if you could just quickly share that also so that people have some context on what score did you apply with, if that's okay.
Oh, I applied with 730, I think 730, 740.
Okay,
but yeah,
great.
that's cool.
Okay, because there are like a lot of like GMAT related questions also which are sort of coming up here. Just quickly skipping through some questions. We already covered work experience. A lot of age related questions which I think Ariba has already covered. Okay, so this is a very interesting question from Juhi, and I think again, Ariba, you might not have had that, but for someone like who doesn't have like a very strong undergrad score, and like they can make up for it with some other aspect shining out, like how do you feel about that?
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of ways in which you can manage this. I mean, your undergrad score is literally just one number that you put in your application, right? So if you think you had a weak undergrad score, but the rest, I mean, after that you worked somewhere and you did really well, then I would say in your story, focus on that aspect. Try to bring out what you did and what your experience is, which actually matters. And if there's a specific reason, like if there's a way you can justify your undergrad score, let's say there was some personal emergency, or there was some particular, or you didn't like the subject you were doing or whatever, and you had a bad underscore, but then you realized this wasn't a sector for you, so you changed streams when you picked your job. I mean, that's a great story, right? You've tried something, you didn't succeed, so you changed course, and then you're doing well at it. So I mean, it's just how you tell your story. Again, if you have a bad undergrad score, I don't think it makes much of a difference beyond that number. Just make sure you can explain it in your story, or if you don't want to talk about it, just don't talk about it. But I don't think that's a big deterrent in any way for your application.
Sure. And I think the only thing that I might want to add is that definitely it's not a deterrent. Like I know people who with weak undergrad GPAs do get into like some of the best business schools, but that's also the time when they sort of leverage this optional essay question to really talk about and like give an explanation, because like in all likelihood your GPA wasn't strong because like you were doing a lot of extracurricular activities in school and you really thought that academics is, it's a focus but it's not that high on your priority, and like you really wanted to like like have leadership examples, and that's why you like sort of got immersed yourself into those kind of experiences. So really use that optional essay to justify why that's the case. And I think as long as there is a connection and it all makes sense, it's absolutely fine. So that's what I would just quickly add. I think Ariba, just taking a step back to GMAT. I think one other question that someone has, and I think this is a question which is there on everyone's mind, is like, how important do you think the GMAT score is for admission?
I think it is important, in all honesty. You do need a decent score. You don't need an 800 or a 780 or a 760 necessarily, but you do need a decent score. And one of the things that you would realize as you start applying is, and this is just the ground reality, guys, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but a lot of people from India do apply, right? And typically, most schools will have like an international quota. INSEAD actually has this thing where they only take a percentage of people from one particular country. And let's say there are two amazing applicants with amazingly good stories. One person has a really good GMAT score, one person doesn't, you do lose out. So it's not the end and all, but do try to get a decent score. I would say definitely aim for 720, 700 and above at least, if not more. If possible, push yourself for 720 and above to be on the safer side. So yeah, I mean, I would say GMAT does hold some weightage just because, I mean, that is a data point that they judge you on, right? So I would say push yourself a little on that one.
Right. And I think one other advice that typically I give out to people is like when you've not taken the GMAT and that's something that you're preparing for, forget everything else about your application. Like literally, like don't even try to think of which are the schools that you want to apply to. Don't even think about the geographies you want to apply to. Just get that good target score, because I think the score also really helps you narrow down on which are the bracket of schools that you have a good chance of getting in, right? I mean, like, so if you don't have that score, I think all these discussions around applications and like how should I talk about leadership, they can wait. I mean, for the scores, I think it is definitely an important thing, as Ariba sort of pointed out. One other question that I want to take up from Shashank, and I think it's a very interesting question, Ariba, that given it's a 10-month course, do you think it was more demanding or exhausting compared to some of the other 2-year programs? And I think the second question that he's asking is, if he's from a unique background, like would you recommend a 2-year MBA? I know you sort of alluded to this answer earlier on, but I think the first part of the question being more important, if you can just answer that.
So the question, it is a 10-month course. So if depending on which batch you take, so I was December, which meant it was 10 months of a CAD and 2 months of a break for my internship. It's super demanding. It's really exhausting. It's insanely hectic. You will talk to people who are doing a 2-year MBA and complaining about time management, and you would just want to kill them, because you would be dying with like your work, your travel, your partying, your friends, your recruitment. It's insanely hectic. Be prepared for that. I don't think I can warn you enough for that. So yes, it's 10 months and it's super exhausting. Would I recommend doing a 2-year MBA, especially to a person? I think that, as I said, would depend on what your plan is. if you come from a unique background and you want to experience more sectors for yourself, then I would say 1 year MBA is not what you want to go for, because you won't have time. As I said, it's super hectic. You barely get time for one internship. You're literally always running against time, always prioritizing, always picking things that you can manage. You never get to do it all. So I think if you want to explore more sectors, then definitely go for a 2 year MBA and not for the 1 year MBA, because you won't get the time and the opportunity, very honestly.
Perfect. And I think I'll just take one last question, which again I think is an important one, is sort of setting the trend now, which is the whole GRE versus GMAT debate. And again, I'm not sure if you, because I know you took the GMAT, I took the GMAT, but if you have any sense on, like, is GMAT more important than GRE, or are GRE scores as acceptable as a GMAT score?
I mean, so I'll just tell you what my thoughts are, but take it with a pinch of salt, because I never even considered giving the GRE. I know a lot of people have. And personally, in my batch, I don't actually know a lot of people who came in with a GRE score and not a GMAT score. And I'm just very honestly telling you what I observed and what I saw. Having said that, if a school says that GRE is an option and you have confidence that GMAT is something that you wouldn't do well on, whereas GRE is something that you would do well on, I would say go with GRE, because, at least they've given you that option. And if you can do well in that option, they will give you the benefit of doubt, as opposed to sticking to GMAT, not doing a good job, and using that score. And then obviously you're competing with so many people, you're not going to get a chance. So I would say check on the school you're applying to. Not all schools accept GRE. Some schools very specifically need your GMAT score. If a school does have the GRE GMAT option, then you can consider GRE if you're not comfortable with GMAT. But even before you do that, I would say talk to specifically people from that course and see if they know people who had taken a GRE and got through. Personally, for INSEAD in my batch, I don't know, but also I didn't actually go out checking, are you GRE or GMAT? But my sense is that most people were GMAT.
Sure. And I think just to add one other thing here, like Ariba is right that, like we applied like a couple of years before, and like that's when GMAT was sort of the very overpowering, dominant test that most people were taking. But I do see the trend shifting a little bit, and like from anecdotally, from what I've heard from people is that now schools really don't distinguish between a GRE and a GMAT score. Like you just need like a good score in either of the exams. But again, like I think what Ariba is saying makes a lot of sense. Speak to a few admissions people from different schools and really check with them. Like don't go in with the assumption that GRE is absolutely fine. Like I know like a lot of schools accept it, but at the same time, be sure before you sort of take that bold step of choosing between one of the two schools. Great. I think Ariba, there are some other questions also, but we are about time. So I think if it's okay with you, like people will keep posting some of the questions on Facebook, and if you have time, if you could just take some time to answer them. So thank you so much, Ariba. Like this was really very, very informative, and thank you for being a part of this session. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me over, and I hope this was of help, and you guys all the best with your applications.
Great. And I think just one last plug before I sort of tune off. Do not miss next Monday's session. We are doing it with another very good friend of mine, Tuhina. She is also an INSEAD candidate, but she's sort of finishing her MBA right now. So she's in the process of it. And I think two very important things that she'll talk about. One, she'll definitely shed some light on how the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of altered her MBA and her recruitment experience, because she's sort of living through that. And I think another theme that Tuhina will touch upon is the fact that she has had an international experience of 5 years. She actually worked in France for about 5 years, and she'll talk about how that sort of played into why she chose INSEAD and how it sort of helped her with the application. So do tune in for next Monday's session with Tuhina. And thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you, Ariba, and see you all next Monday.